Hi, guys. Welcome to Art Talk with April, Season 3. I'm April Harris of Inked April, located in Birmingham, Alabama. We have some wonderfully inspiring artists on this season. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Today on Art Talk with April, we have Rita Burkholder. So, Rita.
Yes.
You are a visual artist. You've worked in theater and music. I even saw, like you're doing paintings and glass work and all kinds of things on your website. So, how did you get started as a creative person?
Okay. Well, I guess if we go way back, I would have to say it was Deborah Fleischman, my theater teacher at AAA, which was a magnet school that was started in 1984. And my sister and I got in the first 3 years it was there. And so I got involved in theater. She wouldn't cast me because I was too shy. So I ended up back in the room. So that was kind of cool. And then in high school, I skipped my math class to go to Ron Harris's theater class. But I would have to say that I really got into art when I moved to Birmingham in 1993. So I lived in Oklahoma actually for 1 year, and I worked at an arts center, which was really cool. And I taught photography classes because I had darkroom experience from high school. So it was kind of cool. I could teach like soldiers and their wives and family how to use the darkroom or like how to frame art, things like that. So I learned very, very quickly. And so I was teaching these workshops at this art center that I worked at. So from Oklahoma, I was 19, and then we moved back to Alabama. I was married at the time. We landed in Birmingham, and I just kind of fell in with this group of artists on the art scene there. I started being an arts educator and teaching classes to children at arts nonprofits like Mono 09 Pod or Space 111, Studio by the Tracks. And then I got involved with the Magic City Arts Connection there. And they have this really wonderful children's festival that coincides with the Magic City Arts Connection Festival. And so I became the arts educator coordinator, which meant that it was my job to find or retain artists and basically herd cats and get them to like sign paperwork to make sure they would show up to the festival and that they had all the supplies they needed. And I was required to like make them drive to Birmingham if they weren't from Birmingham for at least 2 meetings, which is very difficult. So that was kind of, I would say my arts career started out in arts education and through nonprofits and going into the schools and teaching art through small grants through the Alabama State Council on the Arts. So I had this whole art career kind of down there that I started in, I'd say 93, 94. And then I took a workshop in lamp working, which is glass making, where we make beads on a stationary torch. So you're using this really hot 1400-degree flame, you're core forming glass around a piece of like a metal wire or a rod.
Yeah.
And so I taught myself, well, I learned how to do that from a workshop. I bought the equipment and then I continued to teach myself. And then within 6 months, which this always happens with me, I got really good at it. And then I began to teach because the woman I had learned it from would not come back to Birmingham to teach anymore. So the Birmingham Museum of Art hired me to teach workshops. So I started a glass studio of my own. It started out at this studio space called Mono 09 Pod, in which I think is now like Mayor Richard Arrington Drive or something like that. But it was this really cool old building that my friend had built out with lofts and stuff in it, and I would go in there and make my glass. And then I formed my own studio. We had a house in Birmingham with a 2-car garage. And so I completely renovated the garage where I had a space for 6 torches. And people would drive from all over Midwest, East Coast, South, to come take these week-long workshops with me. And then I would invite other artists in to teach workshops. So I started this studio in glass called Fresh Frozen Glass Studio. And I was mainly an artist at that point, working artist at that point, but I was still involved in these other arts education programs through these nonprofits and still working with the festival. That ended abruptly in 2004. My husband at the time Unfortunately, I discovered that he was an addict and he was struggling with addiction. And so unfortunately, we had this very um, kind of abrupt move. Like I didn't, it was a kind of a dangerous situation. I couldn't stay in my house any longer.
Wow.
People were kind of like coming for him.
Oh my
Very
gosh.
complicated. Drugs suck. I mean, crack sucks. So here's this really interesting, very educated person that I was married to, um, that just kind of like fell off the planet somehow, and it disrupted our lives. And what it meant was I couldn't stay at my house or our studio any longer.
Oh
So
man.
this incident happened in like 72 hours. We had to move to Huntsville because my sister and my mother were here.
Yeah.
So we just packed everything we could up and we moved here abruptly, and I lost my studio and it was devastating. I had to quit
Oh,
all the projects and everything that I had going on there. And I think in a way to cope with it, like that was a huge struggle. Losing the thing that I loved so much. It was my entire identity. I had, and I think this is good for other artists to hear too, because
yeah.
I was younger. I was really concerned about my children's safety, but I wanted my art career too, but I don't think I realized how established I was. And I think that um like I had this weird, like almost fame in the glass community. Like I had been in it long enough that I like created some new techniques, and I was also an educator.
Yeah.
To travel to studios to teach class. I was teaching at Miami University in Oxford, their summer program, 2 weeks at a time.
Wow.
Like I was really killing it.
Yeah.
Um, and,
I'd say
but
so.
it was great. But then when we left, I got into a divorce situation. I was basically told that by the judge that I had to get a real job. Um, and so in order to get custody of my children, I know this is kind of personal, but I'm glad to share it because I think other artists find themselves in
Yeah.
hard spots and they choose against their art sometimes.
Yeah.
And they don't have to. But I basically canceled everything. Like I was going to Japan to speak
Wow.
at a conference. I was going to Scotland. I was going to Puerto Vallarta. I think I had like a half a dozen foreign countries that I was either teaching in or had speaking engagement in. And I canceled all of those. And I didn't realize that it would like kill my career to do that. I thought, well, I'll take a year off and I'll come back. But sometimes when you're an artist and you have momentum, you don't realize it necessarily. Your community doesn't necessarily like key you into where you are or what your status is or how important you are in a specific arts community. So it's kind of easy to lose track of that. So I basically lost my studio, lost all of the gigs that I had, or gave up all of the gigs that I had and everything. And then my uh, glass career was kind of in a dead zone. So here I was in Huntsville in 2004. What am I doing with my life? I'm an artist. What am I doing? So I'm working like uh, at the Jazz Factory 2 days a week, begging for more shifts. Nobody was hiring anywhere. It was really hard to get a job.
Oh,
And somebody told me, um, oh, you should go to the Flying Monkey Arts Center. They would probably have a studio space for you. So I went over there and I met basically the founders of the Flying Monkey Arts Center, which was Kat Shearer at the time, Cheryl Carlson, Tom Moss, Beth Norwood, some really awesome creative players that really were kind of like foundational in what
yeah.
the world is today. But they were on Putman Drive,
Hmm.
old garage, and they were like, "Yeah, you can have this space." And there was like a big wooden frame with a bunch of chicken wire that Matt Bakula, who used to work at Lowe Mill, he had stapled all this chicken wire so I'd have a safe space for my glass studio. So my glass studio was like one little folding table with my torch on it, and I was just like worried I was going to burn everything down. And in the background, there was like a stage that had been thrown together, and there was a theater group called Crash Boom Bang,
Yeah.
and they were like this weird oddball theater, abstract theater group. And so they would rehearse behind me while I was working. And then one day they came over and said, "Hey, do you want to come join us?" I'm like, "Yeah." So the next thing I know, I'm like joining this theater group. I have the studio. We're in a metal building. It's like July. I'm dying. I'm just like,
Oh
this is a
no.
horrible idea. Like, this is not what I'm used to, but keep going, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what changed everything for me for the better, because I moved here in March 2004. In August in 2004, the Flying Monkey Arts Center had the opportunity to move in and occupy the Lowe Mill building.
Yeah.
Jim Hudson said, "Hey, I really want some people to be in there. I want it to be artistic. You guys have this art thing going on. I feel like we could work together." So we all just kind of moved over there, ragtag. And before I knew it, I had an instant art family and friends.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
it was great. And so when we went over there, we had these like, it was almost like dog kennels, like the Flying Monkey Art Center floor was like chain link fences.
Yeah.
And I had a big 3-bay studio, for my glass, and I was teaching workshops there. But it was really hard to get people to come to what looked like an abandoned building for
Mm.
workshops. And they, at the time, they didn't necessarily feel as safe. And so I had to kind of do other things. So I had this idea for a library. So I started the Burning Nun Library, which was a community library, and then that like shifted and grew, and that actually became like the library. My studio downsized, and I was inside of the library that I'd started. I dated a guy at the time; he wanted in on the project, so he kind of came in. And so, with moving over to the Lowe Mill, it was great because it was kind of like starting all over, but
Mm.
the I can't describe like what it's like to be in the beginning of something where the building was just empty. There was like pigeons and mice and like lead paint and
Oh my
old equipment
gosh.
around from the factory, like conveyor belts and um
Mm.
but there was a lot of freedom in it, so we could
Yeah.
kind of do anything we wanted because nobody really cared. And so we did all this crazy stuff, like we had shows and things like that. And the art spaces were not open to the public at
Mm.
that time. I think it took like, I think it was like 2007 that it actually opened up upstairs with like artist
Mm.
market, things like that.
Yeah.
It took a while.
Yeah.
I was the first artist to occupy it that made my living from art. A lot of other people were hobbyists or weekend artists, or they had a regular gig and they would come in on
Sure.
weekends. So it was kind of lonely through the week.
Mm.
But then on the weekend, all this action happened. And it was just really, I think through all I had been through and all I had lost in Birmingham, I didn't really talk about it. I think I kind of
Mm.
just wanted to like push it down because it was such a big loss. But now I
Yeah.
have this new start. Um, and so yeah, that was really freeing, and it was nice to have that time to kind of create. And then I ended up just kind of I ended up not doing glass anymore actually, and just turned visual art and into music. So I taught myself how to play the accordion and the ukulele in that time. I started writing songs. And then I started having house shows. So I had this house show
Oh,
series called Rita's Speakeasy at my home. But musicians would come through, and that was because of the monkey, because they were like, "Hey, this band is playing. They don't
yeah.
have anywhere to stay." And I was like, "They can stay with me." So they would come over, and we would have like jam sessions. And some of my artist friends or music friends taught me how to play ukulele, and like, you should write songs. And so I did. And um, it's kind of a crazy story because I do so many things. And when, we had
Yeah.
talked about that previously, like if I had to make a list, it would be like, okay, I'm a visual artist. I do painting, watercolors, and drawings. I design logos and things like that when I feel like it. I am a costume designer and stitcher and producer and seamstress. I am a musician, a traveling musician, a touring musician I want to be. Um, I'm a hot glass artist, and I'm also a trained clown. So, and I and I think this moves into like, okay, so that's how I started, and then I made it to Huntsville, and then I think, as an artist, I for a long time I felt pressure, and a lot of times this comes from like family or friends or husbands or partners. Like, you need to pick one thing, you need to pick it and become an
Oh,
expert at it. And I think as artists we hear this a lot, and I don't know if I'm allowed to curse or not, but I call BS on that.
yeah.
I think that I think that when we pick one thing and stick to it, yes, you can absolutely become a master at that. But I feel like sometimes the passion goes out of it, and not everyone is made that way. Not everyone was made to hyper focus on one thing. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean,
I feel
yeah,
like so you bring that up, and just recently, well, not just recently, I guess like a couple months ago, I went to a Leonardo da Vinci show, and
yeah,
it's like he was like that. Like he was like inventing things and
yeah,
making like building things, and but he was also this amazing painter, and I
right,
mean, it's one of those things that I think somewhere along the way in our society, we've like, okay, if you're going to be an artist, then you've got to pick that one thing and just like drill down into it, and that's what you're known for. That's like your brand or your look or your feel or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just not, it really, that's not the truth. So,
Oh, it's not. It's really interesting to me. I find that like I feel like our culture has taken art. I feel like in America, art is not appreciated or supported for its necessity in the development of our culture. And I think because our culture is very capitalist and work oriented, that your value is tied up in the labor that you're performing or the work that you're doing. And America has this view, I think, and I find this is very much so in Huntsville, that like in Huntsville, everyone wants to consume art in Huntsville,
mhm,
but culturally, as a general rule, they want to consume it for free because it has been free or cheap for so long. But the problem with that is that you lose a large percentage of people that would be creating art because they cannot make a living from it.
mhm.
So you're actually destroying the art community by not respecting it as a job in and of itself. And I think the culture treats art as play.
Yeah.
So as artists, I think what has happened is there's pressure on us to focus on one thing and become really good at it and become a master, because what's happening is that the societal view of an artist is they're trying to merge it with the view of how labor is performed, right? So you have a job in a carpentry shop, or you have a job at a car dealership, or whatever it is, or you're part of defense or something like that, and you're in
Mhm.
that job for 20 years and then you retire, right?
Yeah.
So I think that people treat art that way. I think also it's kind of like a weird backhanded punishment. Like, okay, fine. If you're going to be an artist, you better show us that you're dedicated and you can do this one thing and you can do it really well. Otherwise,
Mhm.
it isn't fair that you're doing all these things because you get to play while I have to work. So I don't know. I really do think that there is a lot of pressure put on artists to just kind of like conform
Yeah, absolutely.
how labor is
Yeah.
seen. And art is labor. It's not.
Yeah, I think I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying too, and I think actually, like, it's interesting because I feel like right now, um, people are appreciating it more or getting to that place where they can see, like, on the internet that there are people who are making careers out of this. Like, even though, like, say you're in Huntsville, that most people will be like, "Well, I don't really know anybody who's actually succeeding as an artist." So, it's hard for them to imagine
Yeah,
that it is actually something that you could do and work hard at and be
right.
successful at, you know? And so but seeing it online, it's kinda like, "Oh, okay, there's people out there who are doing this
Yeah,
for real." Like, they're truly, you know, making their living off of whatever it is they're doing. I mean, I've seen a lot of artists who are doing multiple things just like you are,
yeah.
and when you're, so to get back on that though, when you're creating, how do you go about deciding, "Okay, this is going to be the medium that I'm going to use for this, or is this music, or is it, you know,
Right.
how do you go
I
about that?"
don't know. I've tried to like find the rhyme or reason to it, and I finally realized that the type of artist that I am is project based.
Yeah,
So okay, so for instance, in 2020, a lot of us were in lockdown, right, through April. I think it was
yeah,
April, March or April. I don't remember.
yeah,
But what I had on hand was I had old house paint, like not old house paint, but like if you go to the hardware store and they have the rejected paint for super cheap.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't have a lot of money, and I was working, and at work we had all of these cardboard boxes, and they had these perfectly uniform cardboard inserts. So the way that this particular painting project started, the one that I'm about to hang at the Lowe Mill
Yeah.
Arts, was you couldn't really go anywhere and shop, not really. So I had to kind of use what I had on hand. And what I had is I had been collecting all of these cardboard inserts from the coffee clutch where I worked.
Yeah.
They're all the same size. And then I had all of this reduced price house paint that would have just been thrown away.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is great, like all reclaimed materials. And then I kind of revisited a theme that I had done back in 2009, but it came out completely different. So I have this theme um, called meat tubes. So I like got lost in Berlin in the rain in December one night, and my cell phone had died, and I didn't know where I was, and I really had to pee, and so I'm like in this like icy rainstorm, like
Oh my gosh.
icy rain pellets hitting me. It's like 2 in the morning. I'm coming back from a friend's show. I get lost in the park somewhere, turned around, and I'm just like, at one point it was so cold I just couldn't go any further. And so I
Wow. Oh my
squatted
god.
against a building to take a pee because nothing was open. And so I'm like peeing on the sidewalk up against the building, soaking wet all the
Oh
way.
my
And then
gosh.
I finally like just like walked a little further down and just like sat against the building and just started crying like my life sucks. What's wrong with me? Like I'm never gonna make it back. I'm just gonna be homeless in Berlin now. And then I don't know. And then I was upset because like people would walk by me and I would ask them, hey, do you know where such and such street is? And people would just ignore me, the very few people that walked by. And then I
Yeah.
was just like, we suck as humans. Like humans are awful. Like what, like why do we even exist? And I had this weird existential crisis went on the sidewalk where I was like, people are just all we are like giant tubes of meat. All we do is ingest and excrete and repeat. How is that good for anybody? Like that's all we do. Like all this other stuff is made up. Jobs, work, art, music, none of it matters. None of it does anything for anyone or for the planet. We're just like trying to entertain ourselves till we die. So I had this really like crazy meltdown. And then I did make it home because one of the very nice like African dope dealer guys from the park was like, "Hey, are you okay?" I was like, "Where is the street?" And he's like, "Where do you live?" And I was like, "I know I'm staying above the sex shop, like on such and such street." And he was like, "Oh, I didn't say that. I know where that is." Like, took me there. And so when I got home, I had this idea of these little meat tubes, and I just drew one out, right? And
Yeah.
I think they were kind of like hollow caterpillars with like astronaut helmets
Yeah.
on. It was very weird. Um, so during the pandemic, I kind of got sad. Like people are not careful with one another. People are not willing to even just like wear a thin mat. Like people are more willing to have multiple people die just so they can argue about something, like this is crazy, like that we like it's crazy that the world has gotten this far. And so I kind of got a little sad and I revisited that theme, but I changed it. And so I had these materials on hand and then I just did this project. And so for like months and months and months, all I did was paint on cardboard and like
Wow.
little panels that I had. Um, and then that turned into um, like the pandemic went right into Black Lives Matter movement. And
Mhm.
so, everybody was going out of their minds, everybody was staying at home. But the one thing I could do was be supportive of these protests and document them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I also do photography. So I just took my camera down and I decided to remain neutral at the protests. And so I was just documenting and then like,
Yeah.
turning those photographs into the ACLU um, like I'm about to turn all of them in sometime this year to the Civil Rights Museum.
Oh,
I
wow.
have all of that, but it was a really fascinating situation because you were outside, so you didn't have to wear a mask necessarily, although I did. And then I noticed, like, so being a project-based artist,
Yeah.
ideas come to me in weird ways. So with the movement, what I noticed was an inconsistency visually, and I thought, for the city council and for other people to take this seriously,
Mm.
it needs a look. Like it really needs a cohesive look, like it's organized. Uh,
Yeah.
and so my friend and I would just spend hours and hours every day, pull as much cardboard as we could, and we would just paint all of these protest signs. And so everything had a cohesive look. And then I would give them to her, and we
Yeah.
would go down to the park when everybody met for the marches, and she would pass the signs out to anybody that wanted a sign.
Yeah.
The only problem was they were so cool looking that people would take them home and keep them, not bring them back and reuse them,
Free
right?
art.
I mean, basically, and so it was like Black Lives Matter with like the power, power fist with large lettering, and it's very
Yeah.
like pop art looking, primary colors, things like that, lots of layers. There was like primitive art background style, because I was like, this is a movement of the people. This is a folk movement. Like it
Yeah.
needs to look handmade but cohesive, and it needs to have a look. And I think that in that way, artistically, I was able to contribute to this very important, necessary cause, right?
Absolutely.
Um, and what else were you going to do? It was a pandemic. You couldn't go
Yeah.
out, you couldn't go to bars, you couldn't, so we just literally, I worked, I painted, I marched and photographed, right?
Wow.
And so that, yeah, so I would say I'm a project-based artist, but the ideas come around in the weirdest ways, and I'm never quite
Yeah.
sure what's going to hit me.
Yeah.
But if I get a strong feeling about it, I go with it. Um, I'm currently in the middle of a project that is somewhat political, because me personally, I don't, some people feel that if you're an artist, you have an obligation to get involved politically or socioculturally. I don't believe that. I think it's okay to be an artist and literally just make something beautiful,
Mm.
um, or just make something because that is who you are as a person. You have to produce or make something. But I personally have projects that have some kind of political commentary or sociocultural commentary, like Meat
Yeah.
Tubes, like like what is humanity
Yeah.
actually worth? Like the planet would be fine without us, right? That's fine. That's kind of a commentary on humanity, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm working on a weird, absurd project right now that has to do with bananas and protests. So that will come out this year. Maybe that's another interview.
Oh,
Um,
it's so cool. Like, I
but
love
yeah,
that
just
you're
a
doing
very
that. So, like, I mean, to me, it sounds like, so you're just going along, living life. These things happen to you, and you experience things, and you're, you know, having these moments where you're thinking about life and humanity and like, what does it all mean?
right.
and then and then something just clicks in your brain that, I'm going to paint something to
Right.
represent this, which I've seen the meat tubes on your website, which are really
Right.
cool,
Oh, thank you.
and very original, and I think it's really, man, what a story.
Well, the funny thing too is that people can see that and like that for what it is. It's very cute and very pretty and very like
Yeah,
bright
I
and
mean, it
poppy. And
is.
at first look, you would have no idea, no clue that that's what was behind it, right? So if someone asks, I'll tell them the story. But it's also nice for people to just see it aesthetic, if that's their aesthetic and they like it just for that. I mean, I feel that people are free to consume art in the way that they want or the way that
Yeah.
they need. I don't feel compelled to tell them why it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, when you think about artists all through history, though, I mean, like, even when artists pass away, everyone just decides what it meant,
Right.
like, they're not here to explain it to us. And they're like, okay, so he or she, they were going through this in life, and we think that it means this, this, and this.
Right. Well, my
So,
kids will have my diaries, so they
yeah.
can any of that wrong or back it up. If I even like, hit the charts in any way after I die. um, but yeah, there are other things too, though. Like I am looking for work always. So, for instance, I've designed costume looks and stitched and produced for plays in the school systems here and local theaters and things
Oh,
like that. So
wow.
there are oftentimes I feel like I've done so much for so long that I get enough regular calls that kind of key me into work. And
Yeah.
I do have a stable uh, like entertainment theater job. I am a union member with IOTC Local 900. And so
Okay.
I'm a theater stagehand, and I also work in wardrobe and costuming with the Broadway shows when they come through town. So I am
Wow.
still in the arts in that way, um, which is nice. Like finding something like that, which allows me to pick and choose my schedule, can allow me to focus on a project that I have. Maybe I don't, I cannot do a 9 to 5. It's impossible. 9 to 5s feel to me like, I don't know, like someone has like put a noose around my neck and is like leading me around. I don't know how to explain
Yeah.
it. It feels like oppression. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so I mean, I'm willing. I mean, I will work 4 times as hard on an art project as I would at a typical job, something that somebody would call stable or sustainable.
Yeah.
I would literally work harder than the average bear in an average job just
Yeah.
to do art. And that's not to say there aren't things that I've loved. Like there is one passion I had was coffee, and I worked at the coffee clutch roaster for a long time, and I really, really loved that job. There are a couple of things in my life that I feel I would have been willing to stay. If the conditions
Yeah.
were right, I could have stayed at a place for 20 years. But I
Yeah.
have to feel passionate about it, and I also have to have some kind of ownership in that's whether I'm like branding the look, or like the interior designer. Like I did a lot of like renovations in there. I was helping with renovations with all of us where
Wow.
like, so it was nice to like have that job that I loved and I cared about it. Um,
Mhm.
but there's also got to be like room for growth and things like that. So if
Yeah.
I feel like if I'm in a place and it's just kind of steady Betty, I have
I
to get
hear
out.
you. I really do. So like I'm a graphic designer by day,
Oh,
like
nice.
that's my
Yeah.
job, my career.
Yeah.
And went to school for graphic design and I've had very many jobs, different places. And what was interesting was that what ended up mattering is that it was creative
Right.
and that I kind of had autonomy. I could make decisions and grow, and I had passion and purpose in it.
Right.
If
Yeah.
I were in a situation where I had like a manager or a supervisor or somebody who was like squelching that and
Yeah.
suffocating it,
Yeah.
do what I say and do it now, man,
Right.
I would hate that job. It didn't matter if it was super creative and I loved making the things. If all of that was in the background and they wouldn't let me have ideas or some kind of passion about it, then it would
Right.
be,
Absolutely.
oh, it's terrible.
I think too in those jobs, I'm always curious. I should start asking my friends and people I know this, like, okay, what's a job that you love that you left, and what was the last straw? Because I'm always curious to know what motivates people to move on from something, like when they feel it's time. And I have enough negative self-talk. I don't need this.
Yeah.
I'll just go home and make art and talk negatively to myself for free. Like this is
Yeah.
crazy.
And I
So I
think a
think,
lot of like businesses like that, and I don't know if it's the South. I feel like it is the South, having worked other places. But I mean, there is something to kind of that industrial mindset where it's almost like all jobs are like factory sort of way of working.
oh,
Like
interesting. Yeah.
you clock in, you need to work constantly, and
No
then you
question.
clock. Yeah, like how dare you be a minute late from lunch break or something? I mean, it's just, people can be so obsessive over what they're getting out of their people that they
Right.
forget that they're people, that they're human beings and they're going through terrible things and they need a little bit of grace and understanding while they're just trying to understand what's happening in the world.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
I
Yeah.
agree with you. I think too, like what you just said also brings up a really interesting subject for me. Like over the years, I've had a lot of pressure. You talk about as an artist, what are your regrets? What do you struggle with? What are you like, for instance, what is something that I can pass on that I've learned through experience to other
Yeah.
artists that are questioning what they're doing or how to go about it? And I can say that like for as much stress and fear of instability that I've had through normal jobs, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, right? Um, Over the years, I have allowed myself to stop my art, give up studios. I've had boyfriends and husbands tell me, you should pull out of the Lowe Mill. They're not serving you, and you're like, what are you getting out of that over there? Like, nobody respects you or whatever. Like, you should come home and work on that, or you should get a regular job, or you should stick with this job because it's stable. You shouldn't be making art; it's unstable for you. And
Yeah.
you've got children, and that's kind of irresponsible to be making art the whole time. Like, what example are you giving to them? I've had a lot of criticism leveled at me by partners, family, friends, parents. Well, you're struggling, but yeah, I think you should get a regular job. The interesting thing to me is that my mental health has never been more unstable than when I was in a regular job where I was treated like a commodity that was there to
Yeah.
earn profit for the owner. There was a lot of criticism and ridicule. It's very strict and it's very rigid. And when I finally sat down and did the math, I realized that I would make the same amount of money making art and being in the field of arts than I did working these like regular jobs. And then I'm a lot happier and I had more time for my children. I had more freedom for myself. Um, and I think too, a lot of people wait for their art careers because they have children. Well, when they get a little older, when they get a little older, a lot of times we have a tendency to put things off as an artist. I think my biggest failing was closing a studio or stopping an art project, or one husband didn't want me to tour with my music. I'll miss you. I don't want you to go. Like I never get to see you, and so I stopped touring. Like my last marriage, that relationship was about 9 years, and I really probably produced about 25% of the art and music that I had been up to that point for someone else's comfort. So as an artist, I would say think about it think about it in the long term. Okay, you look at really amazing creative artists like Connie Ulrich. She's a jeweler that's based here in Huntsville, jewelry designer. She's fantastic. Guadalupe Robinson is this beautiful um, pottery artist. She's over at the Lowe Mill. Those persons are really big in my mind because they never stopped making art, and even when it was hard they continued, right?
Yeah.
uh, I would make art for a good period of time, get some criticism kind of from people that were close to me. I think there was added pressure because I had children. I was a single mother. Like, you should be responsible. And I would put my art down and pick up responsibility according to these other people's idea of what responsibility looked like. People
Mhm.
who were not artists.
Yeah.
And I have had, I don't know, like a 30-year career in the arts that I have constantly interrupted because of what other people wanted.
Mm.
And what I would say to artists now is do not let other people dictate whether you make art or not, or how you make art. That is solely up to you. It is none of their business. Your finances are none of their business. Your process is none of their business. You do not owe it to anyone to pick one thing. If you're happy making five things, and one of the reasons I don't get burned out on art is because I am multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
So if I if I burn out, I do a big project and I burn myself out on painting tubes. The next thing I'm onto bananas, or I'm onto photography, or but I'm able, because of that, I'm able to completely throw myself into a project and make a full body of work with that medium and then move on to the next thing. And to me, I think that's so valuable. I think it's really important to realize that I can suffer as an artist and be broke and eating beans and rice and spinach for 5 years. And I will gain enough momentum that will propel me into the next 30 years. And I
Yeah.
see that with like Guadalupe and Connie, right? Like they kind of like toughed it out through the hard times. And now they have a whole career that is just what they do. Or you can stop and start and stop and start and stop and start for 30 years and then be almost 50 and freaking out and having like a psychological come apart because you didn't commit. And you can see where if you had just committed for a little short, brief while, 5 years is not a long time, that you would have had
Yeah.
a long career without interruption. So that is my bit of advice. Like, do not compromise yourself for love, for family, for what society tells you is, you know, responsible. Just throw that all out the window. And if you have children, don't buy into the idea that, you know, that your adult life is separate from your family life, because that's not true. And I think a lot of people cut themselves short, like not involving their children in their art, whether it's performance or whatever. Like I was part of a burlesque that I started with my friend Sasha,
Mhm.
this really cool Posey Peepshow, and I would bring my children to rehearsals, and we were never naked or anything. It was like absurdist, creative clowning almost. It was really cool. It was very popular, and my children loved that. Like my children basically grew up at the Lowe Mill while I was there, 2004 to 2011. We called them mill rats, and um, and
That's so
it was
funny.
interesting because when I was a child, I would always say, people say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" I want to be an artist.
Yeah.
Well, don't you want children? Absolutely not. Don't you want to get married? No, I don't, you know, and I ended up doing those things because it's what other people wanted, kind of.
Yeah.
Um, and this is also really unpopular. Like I was in an interview on NPR once, and I mentioned that I never wanted children, and everybody kind of clutched their pearls. But that's true, you know, and I love them and I adore them. But the thing that I can say is that I never excluded them from my life as an artist. And I think if you're an artist with children, a lot of artists tend to live their artist life as a private, separate, secret life,
Mhm.
kind of. And I think that does a great disservice to your children. And I think it was
Absolutely.
great that I involved them in my process. And now that they're in their, you know, mid-20s, they look back on it and they love it and they wouldn't have had it any other way. So anything that happened at the Low Mill or in my studio artistic, I took them with me everywhere I went. I didn't
Oh,
get a
that's
babysitter.
awesome.
I didn't have somebody watch them. They were just part of my life in all of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that too, and incorporate your children. Don't wait for your kids to get older to make art, because you'll never do it.
I mean, I've spoken to some artists who didn't really get started until after their kids left the house and they're empty nesters or they're retired from some other career, you know. And I
Yeah.
think that works for some people.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, like what you were saying, I feel like as like I'm a mom, I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old right now. So
Yeah,
lots
yeah.
lots of fun. And I'm, that's one of the reasons I'm looking around my art studio and I'm like, okay, who got into this box? Like
Right? Yeah.
why are these pins all over the floor? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But it's just to me, it's such a huge part of my own life that it's just there's no way that I could like separate it and be like, okay, when you guys go to bed, I'm gonna be an artist,
Yeah.
nighttime or whatever, and try to separate the two. To me, it's just I don't know, it just goes together. And children bring a whole lot of creativity to the
Oh,
table.
yeah. Yeah, they do.
I
I've
mean,
had my children problem solve for me before. Like, I'm in the process of making something, and they're like, "Why don't you do that?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So, I agree with you.
yeah, man, and it's like, there's some of the most uninhibited, creative little beings, that they can just bring so much to the parents, artists, their creative process and stuff like that, which I
Yeah,
mean, I really kind of, I mean, like they'll make art on the side while I'm making something, and they'll comment or ask questions and things at this point. But
right.
I completely agree with you on that. I mean, I think that's one of those things that I feel like a lot of mothers, in particular, have trouble like realizing that they don't have to separate the two. And,
Right. Yeah.
just sort of understand that, yeah, there's going to be messes. Yeah, they might get into your stash of art supplies, but you have to kind of just go with the flow and it actually makes them better human beings to me in my viewpoint.
Definitely. I think too, like, when you're a parent and an artist, them seeing that you're making art or that artist process that you spend a lot of time on there's also this thing that to me, it kind of like combats misogyny, which is like the woman's place is the mother and in the home, right? And so anything that you want to do creatively, you need to do that outside of your role as mother. And you need to carve space out separate away from that so that you're not detracting from your main gig, which is to take care of your children.
Yeah.
But by being an artist and including your children in that process, what's interesting is they learn to respect you and your process and realize that the time that you need to make art is just as valid as the time that everyone else has in the household to do the things that they need to do, and that art is a necessary part of what mom is or what dad is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it teaches them to respect that as an art form also, and that way they're not seeing it as just like play or a hobby. And I
Yeah.
think so often artists are treated as if what I have sacrificed to make art is a real thing. It's not fun. It's not playtime, you know. And I think so often people think of it as play. And I think too, I'm really like waiting. I'm kind of hoping that I feel there's been a bit of an upswing in respect for art from the pandemic because we're also shut in. So we're all like visually consuming all
Yeah.
this interesting stuff and art, and people had time to make it finally,
Yeah.
uh, which is great. But the other side of that too is I read an article recently that said in the last 10 years, we have lost 35% of artists in the United States
Wow.
because people cannot make a living at it. It is not supported as a living. It is seen as like a fun consumable kind of. And when people cannot pay their bills or, you know, take care of their health or things like that, because the arts are not really supported the way that they used to be,
Mm.
that's problematic. And so I've been telling everybody, like, do you realize we've lost 35% of our artists? Like, oh my God. Because if we lose art as a society, we are completely screwed. And we need that. Like it drives all kinds of things.
Yeah.
You know, it drives dialogue on sexuality and politics and fashion and the way that music is formed. Like there's so many things that art is necessary for to keep our culture moving forward, I think. So if we become static because we're losing artists, because we're not respected or we can't make a living from it,
Yeah.
you know, when you lose art in a society, that's when really bad things happen. Fascism, you know, like totalitarianism, like it's kind of scary to think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. To me, it's such a huge part of being human, to have that, some form of creativity, or
Right.
craftsmanship or something, and, when you were talking about that, and I don't mean to bring this up, but how do you feel about AI and art
Oh,
and
interesting.
music and writing? Oh my god, it's like the robots are taking up all the you know what I mean?
I mean, yes and no. I think
You
it's
see it
really
as a
interesting.
creative tool,
It's
or do
really
you
interesting because the friends that I have in Europe, we have these discussions, right?
Yeah.
And it's very different than the discussion with my American friends. So with my American friends, it's we're under attack. It's a threat. They're taking something from us. We're never going to make money. And I'm like, excuse me, we live in America and we're artists. We're never going to make money. Just baseline before AI. Like nobody cares about us, you know? So we're really not under any more threat than we were. So that's kind of where I'm a little bit with that. But then with my European friends, they're like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, this is something that can, when I'm having a hard time visualizing a project, I can actually use it as a tool to get to where I need to be in the tangible world where I'm creating a photograph or a painting. So it's almost like they're using it as to like structure a project. It's almost like they're using it as a skeletal form of an idea that they can't quite put together. And then they take that and they actualize it in real life without copying necessarily, but like, oh, now I have this structure for this composition or this colorway or something like that.
Yeah.
But they're not threatened by it. And I think that the closest analogy I can come up to can come up with when this question comes up with my arts friends and community is that when television came out,
Mhm.
most people were like, it's a flash in the pan. It's a passing fancy. It's too expensive. Nobody just wants to watch people live their lives.
Who does that?
Crazy. Who has time to sit down and watch other people live fake lives? Like, it's never going to last. And here we are, like in the digital world with all of these reality things and like TikTok influencers, like, oh, we're there, we're in it. And so I think there are people that are like fighting to stop it or regulate it. But the thing about technology is once it's here, it will not go away. Mm-hmm. And so you have to find a way to adapt. And as an artist, especially if you're making tangible goods, not digital goods, I can see where it affects the digital community, right? So if you're using Procreate to develop things, or if you're an animator or things, I get it. I understand that. But as a person that makes tangible physical art, paintings, drawings, things like that, photography, I don't feel threatened by it. In fact, I don't feel threatened by it because eventually the public will develop an eye for what AI is and what it isn't. And it will never have the value that a tangible piece of art has. And people who collect tangible, physical, tactile art will always collect that. They're not going to be swayed to AI.
So you have a show coming up, and
do have a show
at Lowe Mill.
Right. It's on the 3rd floor East Gallery. So if you ride up the elevator and you come out on the 3rd floor, it's right there. And that will be open February 8th through April 1st. So please come take a look, and everything is for sale. I haven't framed anything also because I feel like framing is a very personal choice. So it allows me to keep the price down and make art affordable. And one of the things that you'll notice there is I will have prices listed for pieces, but it will say things like $25 or more. So if you're a person that can afford to spend $100 on a painting, by all means, do so. But if you can't, I've kind of marked it at the lowest price that I can still like at least be reimbursed for what I've done and materials and things like that, so that no one is really priced out of it. I think it's really important that art is accessible and affordable, and that the market isn't inflated. So that is something interesting that you'll see. So if you do find something you like and you want to buy something, you can talk to Robert Daniel or the persons at the Lowe Mill and have that discussion with them.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm excited to see things on cardboard, wooden panel. A lot of it is reclaimed. I did buy some really nice German paper when I lived in Berlin this last summer. So some of my oil pastels are on some nicer paper, but there'll be more like drawings available. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm so excited for you to have that going on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. I haven't had a gallery show in maybe 5 or 6 years. It's been a little while.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of that. And I'm not proud of that. I'm excited for that. But awesome.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Art Talk with April. For more information on this episode, join the Facebook group, The Art Lounge. Please subscribe and share. See you next Tuesday. Hope you have a great week.